All right. So today we're going to talk about how to set up a new player and how to get the camera working so that you can walk around and see things. So I'm starting off here from where the last video ended. So you should have Unity open, and we're going to create a new scene. So you can either do that by going to File, New Scene, or you can press whatever the shortcut button here is. In my case, it's Command N, but on Windows, it'll be something else like Control N, I think. So we're going to make a new scene, and that's just going to make a big blank scene with nothing in it, except for a camera and a directional light. Now over here in the hierarchy window, as you've probably been taught, this has a list of everything that's going to be in your scene. Right now, there's only these two things, so we're going to add some extra stuff. First, we need to make the ground. We need to make a place for the player to stand. So we're going to click on Game Object at the top of the screen, 3D Object, Plane. And that's going to make a plane. A plane is just a one-sided square, basically. You see, you can't see it from the underside because it's only got one side. And that side is facing up. So over here in the inspector, this is where we can change things about the stuff we just made. So you'll notice plane is selected here in the hierarchy. We're going to come over into the inspector and we're going to change the size of the plane. So under transform, we can change position, we can change rotation, and we can change scale. Scale is what we want. So we're going to change X to 10, and you'll see that makes it longer on the X axis, which is this red axis. We're going to change Y to 10, and that's not going to do anything because the plane doesn't actually have an up and down. All it has is a left and right. Then we're going to change the Z to 10, and you'll see now the whole plane is much bigger than it was before. Then over here in the inspector, you click on the word plane, and we're going to rename it. It's very important that you keep your inspector organized and have good naming conventions for things because it'll make it easier for you to find that stuff later. So we're going to call this ground. All right. Now the ground is going to be a little bit too high, but we'll take care of that in a second. So the next thing we're going to make is our player. So we're going to come up here to Game Object, 3D Object, Capsule. I like to use capsules for players because they're a vaguely humanoid shape. They're taller than they are wide, and just sort of a good one. But you can use any shape you want. You can use a sphere. You can use a cube. You can even use a game model that you have if you want. So you'll notice we've made it, and now it's sunk into the ground. So we're going to take the ground. So click on it, and you'll see over here, ground has been selected. And we're going to drag it down so that it's underneath the player. Probably about, yeah. Let's change this number in transform to -1. Let's see how that works. Yeah, that's about right. So -1. Then we're going to click on the capsule and we're going to rename it player because this is going to be our player. You'll notice it already comes with a few things on it. It comes with a mesh renderer, a mesh filter, and a capsule collider. You're not going to need to worry a whole lot about these things, but the capsule collider, that's going to be the thing that collides with everything else in the environment. That makes it so that you can't walk through walls and stuff like that. The mesh filter, that's the shape of your mesh, which is this little capsule shape. And the mesh renderer shows, basically tells the engine how you want the mesh to be rendered in the engine, like how the lighting works, what materials it has, and so forth. We're just going to leave it gray, and that's going to be fine. But the next thing we need to do is we want to make it move, because if I were to press play right now, you see it, but you can't do anything with it. So I'm going to click down here in the inspector on Add Component, and I'm going to type in player, and that's going to give us all of the scripts that have the word player in it. And the one that we want is the one that's just named player. So you click player, and now you'll see we've added this player script onto there. Now I'll talk in a second about what this does, but if you press play right now, you'll see you can move the player around, but the camera doesn't follow the player. Now, for some of you, that might be what you want. For example, you might want to have the camera be looking down on the player. So you can, bring it up, rotate it so that it looks down on the player, And then when you're moving around, you can see the guy moving around from the top. That's not what we're going to do for this example, though. We're going to make it more like the example level that I showed you, where the camera follows the player around, and as you turn the camera, the player also turns. So in order to make our lives a little bit easier, we're going to want to be able to see the scene view and the game view at the same time. Now the game view, that's what you see when you press play. So it shows you, what the game looks like. And the scene view, this is where you do all your editing. We want to be able to see both. So we're going to take the game view tab and drag it here so that it's right next to the scene view tab, and then make them both about the same size. And then because I want to, I'm going to make the hierarchy a little smaller, and I'm going to make the inspector a little smaller because I like to see these windows nice and big. And while we're at it moving these around, I kind of like to be able to see this console too, because it'll tell me if there's error messages. I like to be able to see it at the same time. So I'm going to drag the console so that it's over here on the right so that I can see it at the same time as my project window. All right, so we've got, I'm going to reset my camera so it's back where it started. And anytime you want to reset something back to its defaults, you can just click on this little gear icon and click reset, and that will reset everything about it. Now this reset it back to 0, 0, 0, so I'll just move it so you can see the guy. All right, so now we're going to make the camera follow the player. So click on the camera in the hierarchy, click Add Component, and we're going to type in the word camera, or as much of it as we need to. And this camera mouse orbit script is the thing that we want to add. So click camera mouse orbit, and you'll see that this got added to the camera. Now again, just like with the player, I'll show you what this does in a second. But to start with, I just want to point out you can press play, and it'll work. You can move the camera, you can walk with the player, and even though it's not really clear that you're moving around yet because we don't have anything to tell, you can see on the right-hand side in the scene view that you are moving around. Okay, so I'm going to press escape, press play, and now we're back in edit mode. So first I'm going to explain the camera to you. So the camera has these different fields that you can fill out, and depending on how you fill it out, that's going to change the behavior of the camera. So the start distance, this is how far back behind the player the camera starts. So if I were to change this to something really big, like 50, and push play, it's going to start really far behind the player. Now, you'll notice that it changed here from 50 to 15. And the reason it did that was because 15 down here is my max distance. It won't go farther than that distance. And the closest it'll ever get is 3. Now, what that's for is if you scroll your mouse wheel, the camera will zoom in and out. 15 is the maximum that it will go out unless I change that number, and 3 is the maximum it will go in unless I change that number. The next thing down is rotation speeds. This is how fast it will rotate. X is how fast it will rotate horizontally, and Y is how fast it will rotate vertically. So right now, they're at 45, which is a pretty good number, and as you turn it, it turns about that fast. But if I change this number, I'm going to click on X speed and I'm going to drag the mouse, and that's going to make that number higher. It turns faster when you're going left and right. Now you'll notice I changed this while I had the play button pressed, and then watch that number. When I unpress the play button, that number goes back to what it was before I pressed play. Now this is to keep you from messing things up while you press them. So if you have values that you like, make sure to write them down so that you can put them back in here once you stop pressing play. But anything you add in here while play is not pressed will stick around, and anything you add while play is pressed will not stick around. That's important to remember. The other thing you can do, like let's say I'm press play, I decided I really like the minimum distance to be smaller than this. Let's say we want it to be 7.34 for whatever reason. And I really like the way this is set up. I can click on this little gear, and I can click Copy Component. And when I come out of play, everything changes back, but now I can click on the gear and click paste component values, and it will paste all of the stuff that was in there when I copied it. So that's another way that you can keep from losing the stuff that you put in play mode. So I'm going to undo Control or Apple Z, and that will undo what I just did so that it'll all be back to the defaults. So the next thing, up-down rotation limits. So this has to do with when you scroll the mouse, when you move the mouse up or down, how high will it go and how low will it go? Right now it can go really low, even below the ground, and that's probably not what we want. We probably only want it to go about that low. So let's change this number to, say, 5. Let's see how that works. It'll only go that low. How about 0? Yeah, that's good, 0. Okay, so I'm going to unpress play, and I'm going to change that to 0. And I like 50 being the top max limit, so we'll just leave it there. But if you want to be able to scroll it higher over the player, then you want to change that. Center above, below target. So this is, if you press play, you can change this number. You can see what it does. That's a good way to mess with anything in this, is just press play, change the numbers, and see what they do. Because when you unpress play, they'll all go away. So you see I increase this, and it moves higher above the player. So basically, it will center the camera above or below the player. So if you want to change the way the camera is oriented to the player, that's the variable for that. So target, this is, by default, if you press play, you'll notice that the player gets set there. If for some reason you want to set that to follow something else besides the player, you can drag that in here, but most of the time you're not going to want to do that. And then the final thing is lock cursor. If I click lock cursor and I click play, my mouse disappears. So it'll be more like the example project. And the reason you'd want to do this is because if the mouse doesn't disappear, it makes it a lot harder to aim the camera because your mouse is flashing all over the place and it's not great. So I would recommend that you leave this on. But if you do, you'll notice I don't have the mouse right now, so I can't go out and click stop. So if you want the mouse to reappear, you click escape or press the escape key, and then now you have the mouse and you can do whatever you want. And you can see sort of how awkward it is to aim when you have the mouse key or the mouse available. So I'll stop that. All right, so that's the camera. Camera's all set up. Pretty much drag and drop. So the player's the same thing. Pretty easy. You can drag them in, and you don't really have to change anything, but if you want to, here's what changes. So starting health, that should be pretty obvious. That's how many health points the player has. You're going to have enemies in this game, and the enemies are going to deal damage to the player. And this is how much damage the player can take before the player dies. And if the player dies, the game will reset from the beginning. The next thing is this invincible length. And the invincible length is when the player takes damage from something, how many seconds is the player invincible before the player takes damage again. And this will keep the player from taking, an infinity amount of damage from just running into something. It's very important usually that this is not 0. You want this to be a number higher than 0. The default here is 3/4 of a second, and that's usually pretty good, but if you want that number to go up or down, go for it. Speed in units per second, this is how fast the player moves. Right now this is set at 4, and if you look in the scene window, you can see the player's moving about that fast. If I change this number, let's say to 10, you can see the player moves a lot faster. So that's how you change the player's speed. Okay, the next thing is camera relative movement. Now this means, I'll press play and show you. If you uncheck that, right now, wherever I aim the camera, if I press forward, the player walks in that direction. If you turn off camera relative movement, no matter which direction I face the camera, and I'm going to press forward, the player will always move in that direction no matter which way I face the camera. See? That's if you want to have a different kind of camera. So like let's say you didn't want the camera to follow the player. that way. You wanted to have a top-down game, sort of like Pac-Man, right? Where the player moves no matter what direction the camera is facing. So you can, let's say, I'm going to turn this off so that the camera won't rotate around the player. And then I'm going to drag this on top of the player. Let's put it back at 0, 0, 0. And drag it up. And then I'm going to rotate it so it's down facing the player. About 90 degrees there. And you see we're right above the player. And then I'm going to drag it so that it's inside the player. This is called making it a child of the player. That means wherever the player moves, all of its children will move. When the player rotates, all of its children will rotate. So if I do it this way, and I turn off, in the player, I turn off camera relative movement. When I press play, no matter what, up is up, down is down, left is left, right is right. I can take the camera and I can rotate it so that it's facing a different way, but still the same buttons move it in the same direction. Now for most of you, that's not the way you want it. You're going to want it the way we had it initially. So I'm going to press undo, Control or Apple Z, until it gets back to the way I had it before. All right. And then I'm going to turn camera relative movement back on, and now it should be back the way we had it. So I can rotate the camera, and whichever way I rotate it is the way that I'm moving. Okay, the next one, jump height. How high can the player jump? Pretty self-explanatory. Right now, by default, you can jump 2 units. If you change this to, say, 10 units, the player will jump a lot higher. Then the next one down on the list is double jump enabled. Now normally you'll see if I jump and press jump again, nothing happens. But if double jump enabled is checked, you can jump and then jump again in the air. Now you can either have this enabled from the start, or you can, there are power-ups you can collect later on that will give you the ability to double jump. So that's up to you. When you design the level, how do you want it to be? This next one, jump button, you can select from this list what button you want jump to be. Pretty simple. If you want to change the buttons for moving, up, down, left, and right, you have to do that via Unity's input system. So I'll show you real quick how to do that. You click Edit, Project Settings, Input, and that'll open up this input manager here in the inspector. And you click Axes, horizontal and vertical, and you'll see how it has the negative button is left, the positive button is right. For horizontal, that means negative means if you press the left button, you will move negative horizontal, so left. And if you press the right button, you will move positive horizontal. Alt negative button means if you press A, you'll go left. Alt positive button means D, you go right. You don't really need to screw with any of the rest of these, but if you want to, you can. Same with vertical. Down means negative up, and up means positive up. So you can change any of these 4 buttons, and that's how you change your controls. All right, so the only thing left in the player is these last 2 points. So there's extra gravity. Now, if you'll notice, when the player jumps, he's kind of floaty right now. You jump, floats down, right? If you increase the extra gravity, let's turn it up real high, you'll notice he comes down a lot faster. If you tweak extra gravity and the jump height, where is it? There we go. Let's say we turn that up a lot. You can get different feeling jumps. Like you saw, the jump was really floaty before, and it's less floaty now. So by tweaking those 2 values, you can basically make gravity affect the player more so the player feels heavier, and then up the jump height so that you're still jumping as high as you were before. Then this last one is clear points when player dies. So by default, there's a collectibles you can pick up that will give you points. If you check this box, those points will be reset whenever the player dies. So by default, you get to keep all the points that you collected before you die. But if you want to clear them, check this box. All right, so that's everything for setting up the player and the camera. we're going to stop this video, and then in the next video, I'm going to start showing you how to set up enemies so that you have something for the player to play against.